Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our Friday panel on the Olympic bid that never came to be. But first, a call for action.
Social media acts as like an evil mirror. It highlights our insecurities while setting the bar for what we must attain to an impossible level.
Perspective on the dangers youth are being exposed to online, and with it, warnings that children are being targeted by social media algorithms, AI chatbots, and other online technology. And joining us now, Sarah Austin, founder of and CEO of Calgary-based Children First Canada. Sarah, good to see you. Welcome back to Alberta Primetime.
Great to see you. Thanks so much for having me back.
All right. You're fresh off of testifying this week before the House of Commons Heritage Committee. What was your message to federal lawmakers?
My message was loud and clear. The time for studies is over. They need to stop stalling and start acting. For years, we've known what the right thing is to do. It's been 1,600 days since the federal government pledged to introduce online safety legislation to protect children and all Canadians from online harms. As every day goes by, children's lives are on the line. Kids pay significantly with their mental and physical health, their well-being. And so really, in my point and the testimony of Josephine, who you heard at the top of this interview, and Zachary, 12-year-old Zachary, who was with me, was really to try and plead with our parliamentarians to do the right thing, to table the Online Safety Act, and to work with parents, their children, and MPs from all political stripes to get this legislation passed as quickly as possible.
Okay, let's pick up on some of that, because this call to fast-track legislation, far from a fast process. Just a couple months ago, you were driving force behind a big push to reintroduce the Online Safety Act by December 31st. That did not come to pass. Give us some perspective on how long a road this has been.
Children First Canada has been in place for 10 years now, and throughout this past decade, we have been really speaking up on behalf of Canada's 8 million children and demanding that our federal leaders take action to protect kids in this digital world. And our advocacy has really been driven by what the kids themselves have told us. Children and youth from coast to coast to coast have been speaking up about what it's like to be a kid in this digital world. It's very different than it was for you and me. We didn't grow up with social media, the internet, and all the benefits and harms that it brings with it. And kids are, as we heard from Josephine, really frustrated with the harm that they're exposed to every day. They see the benefits. They're not naive. They don't want to have all technology taken out of their lives. They realize it's an important part of their education, their connection to their peers. They get to learn and connect with others. But they really see that there's a moral authority for parents, for educators, and particularly for our policymakers to step into the gap and to create regulation that creates a safer digital space for them to live in. In all other aspects of kids' lives, whether it's the food they eat, the medicine they take, the cars that they ride in, the parks that they play in, all of these spaces are regulated. We demand safety for children, and it's not to say that these laws are perfect, but they create a safer environment for our kids. And yet in the digital world, we've gone for over 20 years now, trusting the tech industry to do the right thing, and they have been proving themselves untrustworthy. Earlier this week in the United States, there were bereaved parents who have lost their children, tragically had to bury their kids because of online harms, who stood in front of the Capitol with photos of their children pleading with their lawmakers and where they're pursuing legal action. One of those photos was of Amanda Todd from British Columbia. She tragically died due to suicide at the age of 15. Her mother, Carol, was testifying with me to Parliament earlier this week. The time for studies is over. We need our leaders to take action, and we are begging and pleading with them to do that.
How far do you see the federal government willing to go with the legislation that finally comes to be?
There's a lot of talk right now about what's happening in Australia with the social media age restrictions and limiting kids under 16 from accessing social media apps. That's created a huge global uproar. Parents excited to see steps being taken. We've seen France and Spain and other countries talking about similar action, and it's raising questions for a lot of parents here in Canada. Thousands of parents here in Canada have signed a petition calling on our government to follow suit. We actually want our government to take a further step, to actually raise the bar, because we know that kids are harmed with social media, but it goes way beyond that. We've seen countless examples of kids being harmed by AI chatbots, by the creation of AI sexual abuse content material involving children. The family vehicles even that we sit, our kids ride in have apps that can create harmful content. And so kids are digital citizens. They're exposed from technology from the moment they wake up to the moment that they go to sleep, in their homes, in their schools, on their phones and tablets. And we need legislation that looks at this full range of technology and that holds tech companies to account, and that really does better to equip parents and children who are just feeling at our wits' end, quite frankly, with better tools to keep our kids safe in this digital world.
Okay, in terms of setting that bar, any concern over legislation being unable to keep up with just how rapidly the online world is evolving?
It is an impossible task to have a piece of legislation that is going to be the silver bullet here. We recognize that no law is going to be perfect. It's going to have to evolve over time as the technology continues to evolve. We've seen just in the past few months alone the escalation of harms, particularly around AI harms, whether it's on Grok and X or AI. Just recently there was a boy here arrested in Calgary, 17-year-old boy arrested for creating abusive content using AI involving multiple girls across schools here in the city. We've just seen so many other harms that are being perpetrated against kids, and so we need legislation that looks at this full scope and that continues to be evaluated and evolved. But we can't wait for the perfect solution. We've seen government now stalling for 4 years. 4 years. They promised to do this in 100 days, and yet 4 years have passed. That's a third of a child's childhood. Every day that passes puts kids in harm's way, and so we need them to act with what they know today and continue to evolve and change as technology evolves around it.
You obviously continue to put pressure on the federal government, but maybe as we close the conversation, what kind of message do you send to parents, especially those whose kids spend a fair amount of time online, but as parents, we may not be tracking that activity?
I'm a mom, and I realize it feels sometimes like an impossible task. It feels totally overwhelming to stay on top of these things. But I think first and foremost, we as parents owe it to our kids to be educated and informed. There are lots of great resources that exist from, and I think we need to be equipped in making sure that our kids' devices are set up with whatever controls we can, and that we're limiting their access to apps that we know are harmful and can really damage our children. But to not feel powerless in this situation. We have voices. We can hold our leaders to account. We encourage people to go to countdownforkids.ca to sign the petition to demand that our members of parliament and our prime minister pass this legislation as quickly as possible. The time for partisan bickering over this is over. This isn't about controlling free speech. This isn't about creating unnecessary bureaucracy. This is about the essential task of protecting our children. And so we need all political leaders to work together to solve this. And so we need parents to raise their voices, to hold our leaders to account, and to demand better for all of our children.
All right. We'll have to leave it there. Appreciate your time this evening, and good to see you, Sarah. Thank you.
Great to see you too. Thank you so much.
Sarah Austin is founder and CEO of Calgary-based Children First Canada.